My name is, looking at the camera?
Yeah. Sure.
Different aspects about Ethereum come together to produce a maximally inclusive financial system was the motivating thing for me. And the story that I saw back in 2018, 2019, when a lot of Ethereum developers understood this story, a lot of people paying attention, but very few people beyond that actually was able to connect these dots in that time in which, in 2018 to 2019, crypto was not cool.
Ethereum is trying to reinvent the wheel, which is this very ambitious thing. It's trying to reinvent the way that humans trust each other. Now we have all sorts of coordination technologies in the real world. We have money as a very important coordination technology. We have the legal system as a very important coordination technology. And now we're bringing forward a third form of coordination, which uses cryptoeconomics, this combination of cryptography and economics.
So the general critique is that Ethereum nodes are too big, they're too intensive, running your own Ethereum node is impossible, running your own validator is too difficult, so you just use something like AWS to do it on your behalf so you don't have to worry about the complexities.
In the last decade, blockchains have been very theoretical. There are a lot of people talking about decentralization and openness as ideals. A lot of people talking about censorship resistance as an ideal. A lot of people talking about building better forms of money, building better organizations, and all of these things. But at the same time, the systems were only used by very few people. And even when crypto ended up really breaking out of that bubble and getting used by many more people, often it was getting used in fairly centralized ways.
Back when Bitcoin was originally created in 2009, Satoshi was really testing two things at once. So the first part is there's this idea of Bitcoin, the decentralized currency. It's a form of money that exists purely online.
Plus transactions, plus whatever subset of the state ends up being manipulated during that block. And then this whole chunk by itself can be validated by someone who has no prior information.
One of the experiences I had that I remember very well was my visit to Argentina in December 2021, when I saw that there was a huge amount of interest in Bitcoin and in Ethereum. I was walking around in Buenos Aires on Christmas Day when most things were closed, and the first coffee shop that I found where I could go in and drink tea, the owner recognized me, and the owner let me in, and the owner told me that he had a wallet, and I looked at it, and it was a Binance wallet, and I asked if I could pay him in crypto, and I did, and I had a couple of other experiences where I paid people in ETH directly from my wallet. But one thing that I noticed was that they were not used to waiting for confirmations, right? They were not used to waiting time between I sent the transaction and they received the transaction. The reason why they're doing this is because they Argentinians have a very real need for cryptocurrency. They have very high inflation. Back then it was 60% a year, now it's 100% a year. But at the same time, most of these people, they're not full-time tech geeks, right? And many of them, most of them are not rich, right? And so for them, dealing with complicated technology, waiting an extra, sometimes 2 minutes, sometimes 10 minutes for a transaction, even paying transaction fees of $5.55, all of those things are not acceptable to them.
It used to be 5 years ago that it was all about technology, right? That just pure cryptography was going to solve all of our problems. But I think we've had a realization in the last half decade that the economic side of things is very important. And the field that we work on in blockchains is called cryptoeconomics. It's this combination of cryptography and incentives. And I think 5 years ago, there was too much emphasis on the cryptography. It was maybe 90% cryptography and 10% economics. And I think we've rebalanced the scales now, where we understand that, maybe cryptography is half of the answer, but the other half, the other 50% is economics. And that's a huge aspect of it. And I think the economics of Ether have dramatically improved since 5 years ago for two reasons. Reason number one is that proof of stake dramatically reduced the issuance of Ether. So every day, we're now producing 10 times less Ether than we did before proof of stake with proof of work. But the other very important thing that happened is this idea of bringing income to Ethereum through transaction fees. So every time you use Ethereum, you pay transaction fees in ETH, and that ETH gets burnt, which effectively redistributes the value to all the token holders through scarcity of Ether, the asset. So one of the amazing things about proof of stake is that it was envisioned by Vitalik even before Ethereum had launched. So Ethereum launched in 2015, and back in 2014, Vitalik was already thinking about proof of stake. And he had this slasher post, which was one of his first ideas, whereby you put down collateral, and if you start misbehaving, you lose your collateral.
When Ethereum started, there were basically no proof of stake designs that I was happy with, right? Like basically the only thing that was proven was proof of work. And there were a couple of blockchains that had proof of stake algorithms, but I was not very confident about their security. And they seemed very early. I remember there was one in that I personally managed to find a bug in, and so I was not confident about proof of stake at the time. And in January 2014, I published a blog post that described a proof of stake algorithm called Slasher, and this was like my attempt to create a version of proof of stake that solves what I think are the problems in existing proof of stake algorithms. Nothing at stake was the biggest issue, but in that blog post I wrote that there's no guarantee that Ethereum is going to move into proof of stake, but we are open to it, and this is an interesting research direction, and we'll see. Like, those were not the words, but that was the essential meaning. So after that, Ethereum started work as a proof of work blockchain because proof of work was something that we knew how to do.
So one of the ideas, for example, that we had early on was to have two separate proof of stake systems, not just one, but two. One for the consensus layer and another one for sharding. And one of the big ideas here was to merge these two proof of stake systems into one unified one, which was cleaner, simpler, and also more secure. Another big shift was this idea of signature aggregation. So right now, Ethereum has over 500,000 validators, and this is a huge technological feat. Usually, when you participate in a blockchain, you're signing these cryptographic messages. And to verify one of these cryptographic signatures, it takes about 1 millisecond, a thousandth of a second. And if you have to verify 500,000 of them, that would take 500 seconds, which is way too much. And so one of the key tricks that we brought forward was that you could take the signatures, add them up together, aggregate them, and only have to verify the aggregate. Which was a huge performance optimization, which allows us today to have hundreds of thousands of validators.
I remember like when I first got involved, everyone was saying that like, well, we're gonna move to proof of stake eventually, and like we didn't really have a plan for how to do that. I think that like proof of work was a thing that was like battle tested. Like at the time, people didn't really know a lot of things about like what was acceptable and what wasn't. People thought that like, oh, if you have like a fork, then you're just like your whole chain dies. I mean, if you do a hard fork, like everything will just disappear, or like you'll just split your community in half. And like we kind of learned that that wasn't true, and that made it easier for us to do like more experimental things. The other major thing was it was like if you were going to do proof of stake at the very start, like who would be able to be a staker? Only people who had participated in the pre-sale, right? There was no other way to get ETH other than like participate in the pre-sale or buy it from someone who participated. So there was probably this concern about like centralization of funds or whatever, or of stakers.
So I think that proof of stake is something that is naturally going to be more decentralized than proof of work. And I think it's because the cost of being a validator is so much lower. You don't need to have massive amounts of hardware. You don't need to create entire mining centers to do this. Not only is that more energy efficient, but it also means it's easier for people to become validators in the future. And I think one of the important pieces here is that a lot of the conversation around proof of work being insecure relies on assumptions that were made before the merge actually happened. So there was an assumption that after withdrawals went live, that people would basically just take their ETH and go. There would be less interest in validating. But what's happened actually is that people have now seen that withdrawals are possible, the execution risk is lower, and so you're actually seeing more validators start to come online.
It's easier to have a data center of like proof of work miners because you need to make specialist hardware, you have to do all of these things, you have to have specialist cooling, you have to have like good network connections. Like that's a thing that it's easy to form a monopoly around. Proof of stake is strictly better in my opinion because the barriers to entry are much lower. Like you don't need to have like a whole bunch of like hardware or equipment. All you need to do is have some proof of stake, some money. But like I think the amount of money it takes to stake right now is too much. I mean, you need to have 32 ETH, which is like, I'm not sure how much that's worth, but it's probably a lot more than most people in the world can afford. And like realistically, we want to make staking so that it's available for everybody to participate in because it's the security of our network, you know. So there's definitely more that we can do to improve, but like I think it's still a better step over proof of work. So we've taken one step, moving from proof of work to proof of stake, and our next step should move from proof of stake for very rich people to proof of stake for everybody.
Where proof of stake is just a similar concept of proof of work, but with steps removed. So with proof of work, you have to expend capital to buy your ASIC machine. You have to expend capital to consume electricity. In Ethereum, you don't expend capital, but you just lock up your capital. And so it's a capital game either way, but the idea is with everything, there's capital all over the world. The capital is actually a decently distributed thing in terms of geography. And while it could be more distributed in terms of, you know, the 1% and the 99%, the idea is like everyone has capital.
So number one, I think that's strictly better than proof of work was, because with proof of work, you didn't know who was in control. But like with proof of stake, you at least have some ideas. And number two, I think that like proof of stake is still a strict improvement because when I think about decentralization, it seems like there's two things that are important. Number one is censorship resistance, that no one is able to like censor anybody. And number two is resiliency, that you're able to recover from states where things go wrong. So if we're thinking about like a couple of like powerful entities controlling a lot of stake, we need to think about it in this context. Like are they able to censor people? And like, is it the case that like, if they do something really bad, we wouldn't be able to recover?
The proof of stake algorithm in Ethereum has two components. The one is a local component and the other one is a global component. So one is micro and the other one is macro. The micro one is what's called the fork choice rule, which is how does the blockchain grow, and if there's multiple blocks, if there's a tree of blocks, if there's a fork, how do you pick the so-called head or the tip of the blockchain? How do you pick the canonical chain out of the multiple possibilities of chains? But that happens on the scale of seconds or minutes. And then we have this other mechanism which we call finality, which is a way for the history to be fully anchored, to be fully immutable, that cannot be changed. And that operates on the order of tens of minutes. So every 2 epochs, on the order of 12 minutes, an Ethereum block gets finalized. And what that means is that if there is going to be some sort of catastrophic event where this finalized block gets reverted, then we know for sure that at least 1/3 of all the staked ETH is going to get burnt. And so the cost of attacking this finality gadget is extremely high.
Super. Okay, awesome.
My perspective is that Ethereum is the next version of the internet. I think we are in like the 1990s of the internet is where we are now.
Let me show you something.
Yeah, okay,
here.
what?
Okay.
Huh? Wow, cool. Like in the 1990s of the internet, many people doubted that the internet would have an impact. Many people doubted that email would be useful. People didn't think they would have a computer in their home, let alone like a supercomputer in your pocket. And now we realize that all of this stuff did come true, and that if the internet has changed our world more than we could have imagined. And I think the same will be true with Ethereum in the future. There's a lot of doubt now. The Ethereum is a little like it's slow, it's inefficient, and it's complicated. But we're working on improving that, and I think with time, it will have as much impact on the world, positive impact, as the internet had.
Now, a lot of the community was a little frustrated because we had set expectations on timelines where, we'd said proof of stake might come in 2019 or 2020 or 2021. But there were years of delays, partly because we just kept on improving the design. In my opinion, Ethereum is much better off kind of having a really solid design that's been matured over a process of 5 years than having a rush design that didn't have these 10x optimizations that we discovered along the way. One of the things that we discovered as well is that we wanted to write a specification which was separate from the implementation. So this is very similar to browsers. In the browser land, we have an institution called the IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force, and they write specifications for protocols like TCP/IP, HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and those specifications get implemented by browsers like Brave, Firefox, Chrome, Edge, etc. And we wanted to follow the same model whereby we have a very simple specification and all the complexity goes in the clients. And it's especially important for Ethereum to have client diversity, multiple implementations. And the reason is that if one of the clients has a bug, we don't want it to take down Ethereum. And so it's a way to build robustness. But this comes at a cost because it means that every line of code that we specify has to be implemented several times, 5 times by 5 different clients. And so it's very, very expensive to go implement the ideas that we had in our mind.
So the process definitely did take much longer than I had planned. We originally expected in 2015 that a full transition to proof of stake would happen in 9 months. But of course, it ended up taking 7 years. And the reason why it took a long time was that first we needed to do a lot of research. So in 2014, the main focus of research was just verifying that proof of stake is possible, proof of stake can have the properties that we want it to have, that it is a good idea. 2015, 2016 tried a lot of different algorithms. I think in retrospect, those 2 years were wasted for proof of stake research in the sense that we just tried a lot of ideas that all ended up not working. And then in 2017, we finally found what the correct idea is, basically a way to combine the ideas from existing academic research into BFT, Byzantine fault-tolerant consensus algorithms, and the existing proof of stake ideas. And we figured that out and pretty quickly came upon a design for how to make a proof of stake chain. And then in early 2018, development really started. So then the development process ended up being pretty complicated because proof of stake is complicated, but also because we basically needed to create entire new development teams to build the software that would handle the proof of stake part of the protocol. The existing Ethereum devs, they were already busy on all of their own work, and there were many other things that had to be done inside Ethereum, and new teams had to be formed. These are teams like Prismatic, Lighthouse, all of these companies. We tried a few different ideas. The specification changed a lot. The work took longer than expected. So it was just development taking a huge amount of time. But I'm happy that it's finally finished.
one of the trade-offs of proof of stake is complexity. Proof of work is remarkably simple. It could be specified in a few dozen lines of code, whereas proof of stake is hundreds of lines, if not thousands of lines of code of specification. We ended up writing a Python specification, which was maximally human readable. So we were trying to make it easy for the clients to understand the spec. It was not optimized for speed and for performance. And one of the goals that I set kind of myself and some of the other people was to try and fit everything within 1,000 lines of code. And we basically achieved that. The Python specification for the state transition function is only 1,000 lines of code.
I'm not to community. Decentralized issuers.
I'm not sure that this will be like the best mechanism, but I think the important part of the adoption and change from of proof of stake is that you're actually getting people caring about the idea of just looking at the facts of what kind of mechanisms work and being willing to change their mind, being willing to upgrade in a world where a lot of people want to ossify or stay the same.
Well, you want to invest in that new paradigm, because if you invest, especially when you're in like your late teens or 20s, you're like, oh, I guess I'm just gonna play the old game. You're gonna be the biggest loser in the new game.
I think Ethereum already means a lot of things to different people, and I think Ethereum is going to grow even further in that direction. Right, like even today, there's a lot of people who are just doing international business or creating international communities. Sometimes there are companies, like more and more people are experimenting with DAOs, and blockchains give them an infrastructure that they can do those things on.
A lot of these futurist technologies are going to start to solve each other's problems, and the cool thing about Ethereum is that it's going to be the underlying stack for all of these things. All of these things are going to need investment, all of these things are going to need money, all of these things are going to need coordination of humans and capital. And so all of these frontier technologies are going to be built with themselves, and Ethereum is the coordination layer for all of them.
It is pioneering in humanity right now. At a time when Zuckerberg wants to have more and more power, when Biden wants to have more and more power, foreign leaders want to have more and more power, they're just like fighting over power. Imagine an infrastructure that just kind of powerful by design, but powerful in a way that allows everyone to have power, everyone to have sovereignty.
Yeah, I want to see like communities that are owned by the people who belong to those communities. I feel like a lot of the time right now, there's all of these communities and values and networks that are sort of captured by other people. So I would like to see them kind of be owned by the users.
Accelerating the process of creating a better society and a better world. So it's super important. And it's just like, that's the only way we can accelerate change, is by giving everyone the capabilities of becoming self-sovereign and engaging his energy towards a better planet. And there is just no planet B, and there is no other option than going in that direction very quickly. Otherwise, like, it's not going to be fun. Like, our children, they're not going to be living in a very interesting world.